guys, welcome in, and thanks for joining with us tonight on 11 Alive Plus and 11alive.com and wherever you are watching. We are so excited to bring you the 11 Alive schedule release show is what we're going to call it for the Falcons. We already know who the Falcons opponents are, and if you're wondering who my fine guest is over here, it is Mike Johnson, a former Falcons offensive lineman. He won a BCS national championship with Alabama. We're so happy that you're here, Mike. What's going on?
Going good. I'm excited to see what the schedule is. Obviously, appreciate you guys having me. I've been told I have a face for radio, so I'm excited to be in front of the camera today.
It's not true. We're excited to have you back on TV. You have a history of TV. You did some in Birmingham when you were talking about being a former player for Alabama and doing some SEC stuff. But tonight it is all about the Falcons. So 17 games. Gets a little bit longer since you played when you were drafted in 2010, right? Yeah. This is an interesting schedule for the Falcons that I want to break down. But first and foremost, I want to start with your perspective as a player. What did you look for in a schedule and what you liked with it?
Well, really what we wanted always was balance, right? You don't ever want to see anything tilted towards one. You don't want to have a bunch of away games to start and home games to finish. You want the bye week hopefully kind of in the middle of that schedule, right?
Yeah.
You know, sometime around week 8, 9, 10, somewhere right in the middle, especially with how long the season ends, like you mentioned now, being 17 games. So you just want balance. You hopefully that Thursday night football game and that little mini bye week sometime in the middle of the season comes along. It's just all about being balanced. You never want anything too heavy in one different quadrant. So, you know, hopefully when we see it here in about 15 minutes, you can look at that and say, oh, okay, you can take a sigh of relief a little bit.
When you looked at the Falcons' opponents, because we already do know that, obviously, but when you look at the Falcons' opponents, what jumped out to you?
Well, first of all, there's some really good games. And I think that when we talk about this new look defense from the Atlanta Falcons, we talk about the athleticism defensively, right?
Yeah.
Addressing that in the pass rush, getting a couple of guys up front, signing new players, linebacker position like Divine Diablo, just adding pieces and speed all over the place. And you look at it and it's going to be put to the test a lot. You looked at the last couple of years, the Atlanta Falcons facing guys like Kyler Murray, Jaden Daniels, the dual threat quarterbacks, even guys like Baker Mayfield have been able to really run against you at the quarterback position. You're going to see all those guys. Add in Justin Fields, who you've seen a couple times in the last couple of years, the Atlanta native himself. And these defenses are going to have a lot of tough tasks in terms of keeping the quarterback back in the pocket. So just in terms of home and away opponents that we already obviously know, Josh Allen, I mean, there is a bunch of guys that can really do a lot of damage with their legs if Falcons are not careful.
Can't wait to dive into each and every matchup as soon as that schedule is released. But you mentioned that throughout the schedule, there's going to be some pain points probably for the Falcons, especially for a quarterback who is taking over the reins for the very first time in his career. Michael Penix Jr., it's his show.
Yeah.
This is a big test for Mike. How do you think he fares just knowing the way that the schedule might look at 8 o'clock?
Well, I think that first and foremost, he just has to worry about what he can do, right? And I think we look at it so much, and you know, there's always these talking points of Tom Brady versus Peyton Manning, quarterback versus quarterback. That's not how you have to look at it as a quarterback. You have to look at the defenses, you have to look at the schemes, you have to look at the head coaches. Focus on everything that you can control as QB1. Michael Penix is very young still, right? And I hopefully Atlanta Falcons fans will remember that as they continue to roll into the season, not expecting too much, because as you know, it seems like the sky is the limit for this offense. They have so many nice pieces back, so many explosive weapons when you look at the skill positions. 4 returning offensive linemen. So allow Michael Penix to do what Michael Penix can do and not ask him to do too much.
And one thing that I know that you've talked about plenty on 92.9, which, by the way, I forgot to mention that off the top of the show. If you literally listen to the radio every morning like I do, you understand that you hear Mike right before you wake up. When you're waking up, he is telling you all things about the Falcons on 92.9 The Game. And Mike, you've talked about it plenty of times on your show. There is a veteran quarterback that is behind Michael Penix Jr. and perhaps the fans are maybe making it a little bit more of a bigger deal than it maybe should be. You've been in an NFL locker room plenty. 5 seasons with the Atlanta Falcons. You know the song and dance between the quarterbacks. Are we making this out to be more of a big deal than it probably is?
In my opinion, we are. And you know, I've been under the impression that Kirk Cousins is going to be here, and I've been saying that all along. And I know that Falcons fans say, well, you can use him as a trade piece. Well, you can't have him in the locker room. Well, you don't want the media to be focused on Kirk Cousins on the sideline. Guess who that doesn't matter to? The guys in the locker room. They don't care. All right, the guys in the locker room are not watching the television broadcast. They are not worried about what Kirk Cousins is to Michael Penix and what that relationship is being talked talked about on television. So I think that Kirk Cousins is a phenomenal backup. Let's make the argument that he might be right now the best backup in the NFL.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there could always be the opportunity for another team in the NFL to come along and say, hey, we've got this round pick, and maybe that would entice somebody. But right now, we don't know what Michael Penix really is. We think that the sky's the limit for him. So it's always nice to have a veteran quarterback. And I think that Kirk Cousins is going to fill that role nicely. Kirk Cousins does not strike me as the kind of guy that's going to make a lot of fuss out of the backup quarterback position. And as we well know, that's kind of what you want out of a guy like that.
I've got a feeling he's supported Mike a lot. I mean, Raw has talked about that at length, that every single time there's a quarterback meeting, it's very calm. It's not contentious. That's not what you would think in that quarterback room. But even still, it's hard to have two good quarterbacks in your room in the NFL. It's a luxury at this point. How long do you think that lasts?
Well, I think that we'll get into August and we'll probably know more. And I don't think that, that Terry Fontenot's not fielding phone calls. I think he definitely probably is. But the bottom line is, even if you get rid of Kirk Cousins, veteran backups in the NFL still $5-6 million. You're already kind of a little bit tight on your salary. You already expected to spend that much when you talk about the quarterback room and Kirk Cousins. So I think they're very comfortable where they're at. I know a lot of the NFL talking heads and the national media don't like to take that as an answer. They're like, there's no way this is going to work. I think it could, and I think that Kirk Cousins is very happy. We know that he's relocated his family, to the Atlanta area. We know that he is a good father. We've seen it on, all the Netflix specials and things like that. So, being, having the ability to go home and see his boys every single day, and being comfortable being the backup and filling in that role, knowing you're still making very good money, by the way, I think he's going to be
very
fine.
Good.
Yeah,
Emphasis
very
on the
good
very
money.
Good.
So, I think he's going to be fine in that role until a great offer comes along. I just think that we're going to see it. Maybe we get to training camp, there's an injury for another team. If they feel like they are playoff contenders, maybe they make that move for a 1 or 2 year stint out of Kirk Cousins. But I don't find it hard to believe at all that Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot are not in a hurry at all to get him out of here.
I'm just going to start blaming Netflix because he's going to be on season 2, and things have been weird with Falcons quarterbacks when they're on that documentary. Marcus Mariota was on it the first time around. We know how that played out, and now Kirk Cousins is going to be on this season. Let's move on to the rookies, because this draft class, I think, surprised a lot of people in some good ways. They addressed a lot of needs for defensive players, one offensive tackle at the very end. What did you think overall about the guys that they got, and can they actually make an impact this year?
Well, I think first and foremost, when you look at Jalen Walker, I don't think anybody expected him to be there. And shout out to all the Georgia fans that were paying attention. I think this is the one pick that you've looked at for Terry Fontenot. And keep in mind, Terry Fontenot has been in the crosshairs of some Falcons fans, but Terry Fontenot has made good first-round picks for the most part over his tenure with the Atlanta Falcons. I think this one fell in his lap. From everybody I've talked to, James Pierce was the number 1 option at 15.
Yes.
You did not expect Jalen Walker to be there. James Pierce was the guy they really had circled, and I fully believe the reason it took all 10 minutes or whatever is it on the clock, because they were like, how can we do without James Pierce? We've had him circled the entire time. But this is one of those opportunities, I think, for Terry Fontenot where everything kind of circled in, everything kind of came together. You had an opportunity to get both of those guys just 11 picks apart, and I think Terry Fontenot and company hit a home run.
How do you pass on a guy like Jalen Walker when he's sitting there,
And I'm sure that's the conversation Terry Fontenot was having with Raheem Morris. He's like, well, this is a good problem to have. I'm not sure I expected this to happen. It even makes it all the more better that 2 in-division rivals in the New Orleans Saints and Carolina Panthers also passed on him.
Yeah.
And so, you're kind of holding your breath right there in the middle of that draft, in the middle of that first round, and wondering when that pick is going to come. But like I said, I think they knocked it out of the park.
I think what's cool is that James Pierce Jr. has already said that they can work together, that they are the same position. They're going to learn some different things, obviously. Jalen, a little bit more of a chess piece. He's a little bit more versatile than James Pierce Jr. You can move him around. However, as you very well know, as a rookie in the NFL, you got your plate full. You don't really want to inundate them with too much information. So hone him in on what he's supposed to do first, and then maybe pivot him around the defense and make him do some fancy things. But that being said, both of those guys are expected, when you're a first rounder, to have an impact to some capacity. We don't think they're going to change the whole trajectory of the defense, just 2 guys. But can they help?
I think they definitely can. And the beauty of what Jalen Walker is, in my opinion, is he's athletic first and foremost. You mentioned it. He's got multiple positions. He can help you in multiple ways. But even off the top, until he learns his role, you can just simply trot him out there a couple of times on 3rd down and say, hey, man, do what you do, get to the quarterback. And maybe you have James Pierce or, Arnold Ebiketie or Braylon Trice or Leonard Floyd, one of those other guys on the other side. You can also run a lot of pick stunts. I think that when you talk about Caden Ellis at the linebacker position, his sack numbers have always been great from a middle linebacker spot. And so I think that there's really a lot of combinations that if you're Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich, you're probably very excited about bringing to the table for this defense this year.
What do you think this defense is going to look like under Jeff Ulbrich? We knew what it looked like the first time around to a degree, but now he's a completely different coach. He's got the full reins this time. It is his defense. He has a lot of new coaches on that side of the ball. What do you think we can expect?
It'll be interesting to see how they start to marry everything, because you look at last year, the beginning of the year, in Jimmy Lake, and Jimmy Lake's coverage was off. He was asking his corners to do a lot in terms of tackling and stepping up. Mike Hughes is one of the best tacklers in the NFL, it seems like, for the first 6 or 7 weeks. And then you get the bye week, and it was clear that when you look back at the first halves of some of the quarterbacks you were playing against, 13 of 14, 12 of 13, they were just dinking and dunking you apart up and down the field in the first half of these games. You get past the bye week, it's very clear to me that Raheem Morris took over the reins just a little bit and said, look, got to press up these corners, we got to run more stunts, we got to find a way to get the passer, and the sack numbers started to go up at the end of the season. Marry that with Jeff Ulbrich, who is known as being a guy that tries to get home with just his front four, and it's going to be interesting to see. I think that both these guys have proven their ability in the NFL to use what they have, the tools at their disposal, to be able to get in the backfield and kind of bring everybody together. So you've got the tools up front now, you think. You've got athleticism. You really have an embarrassment of riches, I think, at the linebacker position. Let's see what we can do in the secondary to make sure we get some lockdown coverage.
Speaking of the secondary, let's go back to the rookies for a second, because there were 2 guys picked up from the secondary. Xavier Watts, who I have no idea why he was sitting there in the 3rd round, and thank goodness he was there because the Falcons get him, and then Billy Bowman Jr. after him. Those 2 guys, I think, are going to surprise some people, and the coaches feel like that as well. How do you think they can make an impact in the secondary?
I don't think there's any doubt about it. And you look at Xavier Watts, and the first thing that I said when I was watching Xavier Watts' film is he looks just like Jesse Bates, the college version.
And he loves Jesse Bates.
Exactly. And I think there's so many people that watch film, and you see a tipped football right across the middle and an interception. Jesse Bates has done this, and that's exactly what some of Xavier Watts' highlights films look like from college. But the bottom line is those things don't happen just by chance. You know where you're supposed to be. You know where the quarterback's going with the ball. You know the opportunities for a tipped pass and bringing it back the other way. I think he's a ball hawk. I think that both these guys, if he is able to get that starting spot back in the back end, can be turnover machines that we have not seen the Falcons secondary as a whole be able to do for really the last few years. So I think it leads to more interceptions. And you mentioned Billy Bowman. I think that we have a lot of questions about the cornerback room for the Atlanta Falcons. Where does Clark Phillips sit? Obviously, Mike Hughes, you think a lot of. You brought him back in the fold. But Billy Bowman, from everybody you talk to, they expect him to be in that nickel spot, compete for the nickel spot. He has shown the athleticism and ability to do that. So, look, let him marinate. I don't think there's any pressure on Billy Bowman to step right into that role, but obviously the upside is there, and anything you get out of him this coming season, at least in the first half, in my opinion, will be a bonus.
Slam dunk for this rookie class, in my opinion. I think they killed it with this one, and honestly, they needed to, because there was a lot of pressure on the defensive side of the ball to make sure they got those pieces to be better on defense. Let's go to the offensive line. We've got about 3 minutes until the schedule comes out. It's your favorite thing to talk about.
100%.
So, yeah, right, of course. The Falcons' offensive line is going to look pretty much the same, but Drew Dahlman's a big missing piece to that. Center and quarterback, it is a very special relationship, an important one in the NFL. So when you're Michael Penix Jr. and you're having to switch now to, we believe, will be Ryan Neuzil, how much of an impact will that actually make?
Well, the good thing is that Ryan Neuzil spent a lot of season as the backup last year, as did Michael Penix, right? So you have those opportunities. And I think this is something that people don't realize. Ryan Neuzil's left-handed. And I think that's going to be one of the crazier things. A left-handed center snapping to a left-handed quarterback is just not something you see every day in the NFL.
Did you see that ever when you were
I don't remember it ever. Okay. I don't know that I ever saw a left-handed center in all my football days.
Wow,
and so to
really?
be able to see that in Ryan Neuzil, and we've been saying all along, at least on the radio every single morning, there's 4.5 returning starters. So you look at Ryan Neuzil last year, Drew Dahlman was out for, I think, 8 games. Yeah. Ryan Neuzil filled in very nicely. As a matter of fact, they had a couple of games where offensively there were explosions, yardage-wise, passing game, run game. He's able to do a lot of different things. They developed him nicely. And I've talked to Jake Matthews, one of my former teammates, about this a number of times. This is an offensive line-friendly offense when you run it the right way. It's bootlegged, it's wide zone, it's using your athleticism. I think Ryan Neuzil fits very, very nicely into what they'll be asking him.
Any concerns for you on the offensive line?
Well, I think that everybody looking at it is probably looking at Caleb McGarry at right tackle, right? And I think that's the usual suspect. But when you look at the NFL as a whole, most right tackles are average pass protectors. That's why they play right tackle. You know what I mean? Now, you can look at the Eagles and Lane Johnson, some of the other pieces on some of the better teams and say, man, that guy's next level. But Caleb McGarry, I think, has really progressed through each of his years in Atlanta. Doesn't mean he's great at this point in pass protection. But what he brings you in terms of the wide zone, the run-first scheme with Bajan in the backfield, there's a lot of upside there. So I wouldn't say it's a worry of mine. I know exactly what that guy is going through and some of the upsides and downsides of playing that right tackle spot. But I think Caleb McGarry needs to definitely definitely step up in certain instances this year and make sure we don't have another TJ Watt game like you led off with last year.
I think it's a really interesting point that you bring up with the center symmetry between Mike and Ryan Newsel, a lefty-lefty.
Yeah. I don't know, and again, forgive me for not having these stats. Could not tell you the last time it happened. I don't know if it's ever happened in the NFL. So I'm sure Steve Young,
they'll figure it out.
Maybe Tua somewhere along the line. I have no idea, but it's strange to look at if you've never actually opened your eyes and said, man, that's a lefty to lefty.
I'm going to ask you one quick question about James Pierce Jr. I did the same with Jerry Gray, and one of the things that jumps out, obviously, is how long and fast he is, and he loves to get after the quarterback.
Yeah.
You're a former offensive lineman.
Yeah.
When you got a guy like that coming off the edge,
it's terrifying.
How much is it? I was going to say, how much is that potentially a mismatch for other offensive lines?
It's terrifying because you look at the length, and so much is made of offensive lines' arm length, right? When you look at Will Campbell, who obviously came out of LSU, got drafted in New England, everything was made about his arm length. That happened here, 20 years ago with Sam Baker. Everybody talked about Sam Baker's arm length. Could he get the longer pass rushers away from him? And it is a struggle for those guys. When you have the length and you also have the power, what you can do as a defensive end, you can power rush, and then you can also set up for counter moves. And when you have all the ability to do all those things, you get the offensive lineman leaning, maybe their face gets a little too involved. That's when the spin move, that's when the rip move comes into play. Yeah, I'd say terrifying is the word. Yeah, it's terrifying.
James Pierce Jr., he is long. I went out there for rookie minicamp, and he was every bit as tall as he is written down on the sheet of paper. We're getting very, very close to this schedule being released, and I know that people are very excited about it, and my producer just told me that it is out, but she's getting some stuff together for us. Much anticipated schedule. I want to first talk about, before we actually see what this looks like, the international game. They get a game in Berlin. It's the first time the NFL's gone to that city in Germany for a regular season game. Good opportunity for the Falcons, especially with the fan base that they have out there.
And I think that, as you know, more so for the fans than anything, these international games, players do not love them. That's what are we talking about?
You didn't go to any, though.
I didn't go to the international games. That was just ramping up when I was kind of coming into the NFL. But I will say, I think we're looking at a 10-hour and 45-minute flight from Atlanta to Berlin. Yep. That's never a good thing, right? If you're a player, you always look forward to, possibly a bye week afterwards. We'll see in just a second what that brings. But that's a tough flight. And when you look at just simple things as hydrating and, overcoming muscle soreness, airplanes are not good for that, right? And so, we've heard from a number of different people about the food in Germany and all this other stuff that's going on over there. I'll be curious to see how long the Atlanta Falcons spend in Berlin, and what that opportunity looks like for them.
Yeah, the NFL has started to do all of these studies that it is more beneficial to the players to spend less time. But if you've been to Europe, it's a gnarly trip to go over there and come back in 3 days. So that's aggressive. I'll start talking through the schedule a little bit, Mike. You can pull it up too. They are going to start, we'll just go real quick here. They're going to start week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There's really no surprise. They go straight on the road to an NFL storyline that I think national media will be obsessed with. They're going to go to the Vikings in week 2. It doesn't really have anything to do with Mike Penix Jr. Then they also have another road game at the Carolina Panthers. So you're starting out with 2 NFC South opponents, 2 in the first 3 weeks of play. Dan comes here week 4. Washington Commanders come here week 4. So let's just start there.
Okay.
Your bye week is week 5.
That is, that's brutal. Let's just call it what it is. That's absolutely brutal, especially knowing that you have a trip to Berlin on the docket in week 9. You never, and I just mentioned a minute ago, you want symmetry in the schedule. You want balance. You want things. You want
week 10 is going to be that international game.
Week 10 international game. So you would love to have week 11 be that bye week. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the Falcons are going to do that. That's a brutal break. I mean, it is what it is. Not only that, but when you go to bye weeks, Maria, a lot of times there's a lot of self-scouting. The Falcons did it last year. They did it really well. Raheem Morris was like, hey, we're self-scouting. We're figuring how we get the sack numbers up. They're going to have to do self-scouting based on 4 games, and they're not going to have another opportunity to do that throughout the rest of the season. So a week 5 bye week that's unfortunate. Let's just, to put it lightly, that's unfortunate.
It's painful, and it just comes after Dan Quinn's return, obviously. Let's talk really quickly through those first 4 matchups before the bye week. Where do you think they'll be at in the schedule? You've got Tampa, Minnesota, Carolina, and Washington.
Well, it's tough to say. Obviously, Tampa Bay is the division winner from a year ago, but the Falcons were able to beat them twice. One of those games was on prime time, and obviously everybody remembers the overtime victory and Kirk Cousins making the throw, and you felt really good about that situation. That's going to be a tough matchup. That is an explosive offense. You're getting another offensive coordinator change in Tampa Bay, but Baker Mayfield's been good. They drafted another rookie wide receiver. you're thinking at some point, maybe not week 1, that you'll get Chris Godwin back healthy, Bucky Irving, much improved run game. So there's no doubt about that. Not only that, but when you look at Tampa Bay's defense, blitz happy. They always have been blitz happy. And Michael Penix in week 1 as a starter, facing the blitz and schemes that you're going to see from Tampa Bay with a new center and Ryan Newsel, that's a pretty tough draw there in week 1. So hopefully they can get their feet wet quickly.
I mean, that's what you got to do. Throw them into the fire when you're doing that. He had 3 games last year. Coming into this is now completely Mike Penix Jr.'s show. The one thing I will say is that the bye week is week 5. That's going into Monday Night Football against the Bills. Yeah. Do you think that plays them any favors whatsoever? Josh Allen, in and of itself, that's a tough matchup.
It's hard for me to remove myself away from the fact that the bye is in week 5, right? So I'm still
you're married. I'm
still swallowing that one. Okay, I'm still trying to get rid of that one. That's the fact that you're not having the bye week after a 10.5-hour flight home from Berlin. But yes, I think if you want to take it in terms of what that'll look like, you'll probably play the Commanders, right? And then I imagine it's going to be a hey, I'll see you Thursday kind of thing for this situation. Maybe you do fit in a little mini 3-day bye right there, knowing that you have Monday Night Football. And I'm assuming that Raheem Morris will do that. Yeah. Just knowing how difficult this stretch of games will be because your bye week is so early. So that's obviously a huge thing to be able to get that and push that all the way an extra day to Monday Night Football. But it's the Buffalo Bills. I think we all assume that you're going to need all the days you can get leading into that game because the Falcons struggled stopping the run a year ago. Josh Allen does some things that no other quarterback in the NFL can do with his legs, and we know that this defense is going to be put to the task early and often.
That's also going to be a tough ticket for you Falcons fans. Hate to break it to you. That's going to be one that everybody wants to go to on Monday Night Football. Let's continue through the schedule. Megan's working really hard on getting that together for you right now. She said it's about to come up right now. Let's keep going past the Bills. By the way, the Falcons this year, you're about to see it. The Falcons are playing the entire NFC West, so they've got the Rams, Cardinals, 49ers, and Seahawks on the schedule. Also the AFC East. All of them are opponents this year. The Bills, Patriots, Jets, and Dolphins. So now you're looking at the schedule and how it plays out. You have the Bills. Moving on from the Bills, you have week 7. You go to San Francisco. Week 8, you come back and play the Dolphins. I'm going to pause there. So you've already played the Bills on Monday Night Football. You have a game that same week.
Yeah.
And you go to San Francisco. That is rough. What do we think about that?
And all I can think about right now is that I think we played when I was playing the Seattle Seahawks on a Sunday night, and the return trip, of course, you're getting home at like 7 a.m.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
So that's already really, really tough. Not only that, but you add in the fact that all 3 of those teams, the Bills, the 49ers, the Miami Dolphins, extremely different in the way they go about things. You're going to be seeing Josh Allen, obviously an MVP. Christian McCaffrey will be healthy, I believe, there for the 49ers in week 7. And then, I think hoping for Dolphins fans, a healthy Tua Tagovailoa there in week 8. It's just a different way of doing things. And the fact that you have a tough travel right there in the middle of 2 of those home games. Maria, I'm looking at the schedule. The NFL did them no favors with a primetime game on the West Coast with no bye weeks attached to it. That's a tough draw.
Gosh, especially when you think about last year and the strength of schedule that they had was very friendly. And this year.
Isn't that always the conversation, too? It's like always, strength of schedule this, strength of schedule that. And I realize the science behind it. It's the NFL. It's a talking point. It's a year-round calendar. But you don't ever look at strength of schedule and think, okay, 8:20 game in San Francisco coming off playing the Bills on Monday Night Football. It's just, that's about as brutal as it gets, honestly.
It's really tough. And they continue the road trip from New England. They are going to go to the Indianapolis Colts. And then in week 11, well, they'll play the Colts, but they're playing that in Berlin. So, mind you, we've already talked about this tough stretch and all of the different kinds of teams that you're going to see in the way that they go about things, as Mike had mentioned. And then headed to New England straight from that. So you have 2 road games. You're going to New England, and then you turn around the next Sunday, which really you're probably going to get there earlier in the week. You go to Germany.
Yeah.
That's a rough 2-game slate right there.
I would be curious to see, and you and I talked about this, with New England being a team that's obviously not a quick flight. I'd be curious to see. Raheem Morris is always, I believe, everybody you talk to, Raheem Morris is, hey, the less amount of time we can have boots on the ground, the better. He wants to get in and get out. I mean, he understands the family dynamic of some of his players. He's got young children himself, right? Sure. He doesn't want to spend a ton of time. But when you look at New England, I will be curious how much time you can knock out off that flight if you fly from Boston to Berlin and make that a little bit more easy to stomach. But you look at both those games back to back. Now, nobody really knows what New England is at this point. They've got Mike Vrabel in there. Obviously, Drake May, I think the sky's probably the limit for him. But you don't know what you have. A lot of questions about the Indianapolis Colts as well. So as far as opponents go, there's a little bit of a knockdown there in terms of the previous 3 weeks, but still very, very tough draw when you talk about going to Berlin after going all the way to Boston for that Patriots game.
All of that is a tough draw, and we'll see how they navigate that travel schedule. I think, in my opinion, which nobody's asking me, but in my opinion, it would be easy to go from New England to Germany instead of coming back here and bouncing the guys all over the place because it's already a tough trip. And as you mentioned, that week 5 bye week, certainly not going to do anyone any favors in that part of the schedule. One thing I want to go back and talk about really quickly, week 7 at San Francisco, the 49ers, that is a Sunday night football matchup.
Yeah, and that's another tough draw, obviously, for the Atlanta Falcons. And like a lot of these questions will be answered as we move into the season because we have questions defensively about what the Falcons are, right? How much can you get out of James Pierce and Jalen Walker early in the season? What does the secondary really look like? Is Xavier Watts starting at the the safety position, or are we talking about another younger player being back there? So I just look at it offensively for some of the weapons you're going to see. And San Francisco obviously has a ton of them. Buffalo has a ton of them. Tyreek Hill last year was voted as the #1 player in the NFL that you'll be seeing there in Week 8 for the Miami Dolphins. So all those games, and you're talking about primetime matchups, we don't want our Falcons to look bad on primetime. There's no doubt about it. So hopefully they can get that defense squared away early as they have some tough matchups there all the way through Week 8.
I remember last year the primetime games were really front-loaded towards the beginning of the schedule, and obviously they reflect into the Commanders game later in the year. Might have been better to get them out of the way, only because you did at that point have a veteran quarterback who had done that plenty of times before. This is a completely different scenario to put him out there, and given the schedule the way that it is, this is a rough start.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think, look, as Falcons fans, we get excited about the primetime games. I don't want to sit here and act like as a fan,
no doubt.
The fan part of me is like, this is awesome. You want to be able to do things like tailgate and sit around all day and watch the other games and not have to worry about it and things like that. And again, you're going to get on the flip side, not a primetime game, but the 9:30 a.m. for Indianapolis, same thing. You get a chance for the entire NFL world to watch your team on center stage. So hopefully, like I said, they can get it squared away in those primetime matchups. You mentioned the ones you had last year. It was awesome to see, them come out victorious against Philadelphia. Could have and should have beat Kansas City. They come out victorious on Thursday Night Football against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then a game against the Las Vegas Raiders that made everybody's eyes bleed there at the end of the season.
Awful.
So it was, there's so many different dynamics that go into the primetime games, but like you said, when you talk about offensively, going up against a couple of teams that really know how to do things and get it done, those Week 6, Week 7 matchups are really, really tough draws.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different talking points in the schedule to this point that I think could be pretty challenging for the Falcons. Again, we love seeing them on primetime, but I want to keep going through the schedule really quickly. And you do have also, I think, let me go back because I don't have this memorized. The Minnesota Vikings were also going to be Sunday Night Football. So you have a Sunday Night Football matchup at the Vikings, and then you also have Week 6. No, that's not right. Week 7 at the 49ers. So that's 2 Sunday Night Football matchups really kind of early in the schedule. Then you're bouncing around, you're going to Germany, you're coming back. You get somewhat of a mini break with the Panthers there in Week 11 coming back from Germany. We would love to see a bye week there probably, but having the Panthers there might be okay. You continue into your NFC South play. You go to the Saints, and then after that, you go to the Jets and you see Justin Fields for a millionth time and a millionth different team for Justin Fields. That part of the schedule, I know you wanted a bye week after the Germany game, but where are you at with Panthers, Saints, and then they go to New York?
And the thing that honestly sticks out to me.
New head coach too, Aaron Glenn.
Yeah, and the thing that sticks out to me about all of this is the fact that you not only do you have a rough schedule not having the bye week after the Germany game, you don't even have like multiple back-to-back home games until you get to the end of the schedule, right? So you look at these trips.
That's a good point.
You're going to Germany. Of course, you get Carolina at home. That's the team that beat you in Week 18 last year, right? That was the Bryce Young. Really, they feel great about Bryce Young after Week 18 against the Atlanta Falcons a year ago. So you flip that around. You're at New Orleans, at New York. Those are not easy trips. Those are tough places to play, especially New Orleans when you're at the Atlanta Falcons. You get that one snippet of a home game in Week 14 against the Seattle Seahawks, and then 2 more away games right there in a row against Tampa Bay and Arizona before ending the season. So, again, kind of the theme, the NFL not doing the Falcons any favors when you talk about, what are we at now? 1, 2, you got 5 away games in 7 weeks, one of those being in Germany, right there towards the end of the season when that bye week is already long gone.
When you're a player, before we keep going into the schedule, but when you're a player and you see that and you just reeled off all of how many away games you have that early in the season, What's your mentality when you see that?
Well, I think first and foremost, you're happy that you play for a player-friendly coach. You know, Raheem Morris is known as being a player's coach, and he's one of those guys that understands it and tries to take as much off the legs as he can. When you're looking at the schedule right now, and I guarantee you they're all probably reacting to it the same way I am, it's like he's going to have to take something off our legs at certain points throughout the season. It's just too tough of a stretch, opponent-wise, travel-wise, everything else. And again, you know, we talk about that week 12 to 16 stretch where you have 4 away games in 5 weeks. Now, one of those is a Thursday night football game, which, look, it's a mini bye week. You get a couple extra days off. And then you go all the way to Phoenix in week 16.
Yeah.
So there's really no slack being cut there. You would love to have the Thursday night football game backed up to a home game. That's just not the break the Falcons were getting with this. So I think it is going to be up to Raheem Morris to say, look, let's get our work by staying off the ground and not putting too much on our legs. It's going to be very cerebral in terms of watching film with Michael Penix and possibly Kirk Cousins in that room as well. So they're going to have to learn to work and get things done without putting too much pressure on their legs and making sure they stay fresh.
There's actually going to be a lot of conversations happening inside that building and how they can navigate the schedule best to benefit the players, because truly this is a tough schedule in terms of travel. You're not home a lot. So you go to the Jets and then you have the Seattle Seahawks here. We'll get into why that game might be important in a little bit and the local tie that we have there. And then you have Thursday night football, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers week 15, as you mentioned, kind of a mini bye after that. Week 16, you go to the Cardinals. That's 2 back-to-back road games again, and then you have the Rams here, and then you finish off, finally, with 2 games at home, okay? So that back stretch of the schedule, once you come back from Germany, what's your biggest concern with that back half?
Well, I think when you look at, obviously you got the New Orleans Saints twice, and one of the things that used to happen 10, 15 years ago was you used to backload division opponents. It's not as much anymore. Obviously they're opening with Tampa Bay at home in week 1. You don't see it as much anymore as you used to, where it used to get to December and you'd have at least 3 division games, you know, throughout December. So I just look at the emotion involved, and not only that, the style. We let off, you know, talking, you know, 20 minutes ago about dual threat quarterbacks and legs and getting more athletic on defense, and everybody they've brought in has been to make yourself more athletic defensively. Kyler Murray in week 16, how tired are your legs after all those games in a row and all that travel right there. And then obviously the emotion being on the line with Sean McVay, being an Atlanta native. That's Matthew Stafford coming back into the fold in the city of Atlanta. There's a lot of sub-stories there, I think, throughout that entire stretch. And you add in the fact that it's just going to be tough. Justin Fields. I mean, all these matchups have certain things that you know is going to make each of these teams dynamic, and I think they're saying the same things about the Atlanta Falcons. There's no doubt about it, but again, the theme of this entire conversation is the NFL did them no favors. There's no doubt.
There is some newness to the Falcons, and especially when you're first starting off the season, you got a new defensive coordinator who is familiar, but he's going to do some different things, and especially with the different pieces that he has. So that will be intriguing to start the year. Let's go into more of the positive note. And when you look at the schedule, what's a matchup or two that's the most intriguing in your opinion?
Well, I think first and foremost, the fact that you're in Germany against the Colts, who really don't have an identity right now. I mean, the Indianapolis Colts are about as in flux as you can think of in terms of what they have going on. So you look at the Colts in Germany, tough draw, but that should be a winnable game for the Atlanta Falcons. Carolina Panthers, like I said, they kind of went to town on you in week 18. But coming back, that should be a winnable game at home. So hopefully you can get your feet pointed in the right direction, even though that is a couple of tough draws in terms of travel before you get a couple of games against the New Orleans Saints, which, again, we don't know what the Saints are. We don't even know who's playing quarterback for the New Orleans Saints at this point. And then the New York Jets, obviously, with Justin Fields on the field. I would say one of the better things about this schedule, if we are highlighting stuff, especially on the back end like you talked about, the risk of snow is very, very low in cold weather games in terms of the Atlanta Falcons playing this year. So a lucky break in terms of that. You haven't had to deal with that much the last couple of years, and this is another one that goes in that direction.
Yeah, I was just about to say, when you look at that back half of the schedule, which is typically obviously where the snow comes into play, you really don't have to worry about that too much. Maybe the only place you do would be the Jets, and it's still November. You know, so it's possible that that doesn't happen. It'll be cold, but, you know, are you getting a snow game? No.
No doubt about it.
The fact that you have the Bills here is wonderful because you don't have to deal with Orchard Park and all the snow that they deal with, obviously. Wrapping up the season at home, those 2 home games, which I think is it's alarming that that's the way that we have to wait for it. But do you think that could help them at all?
I think it should.
It's too late.
Well, I was going to say you hope that they're meaningful games at that point, right? Especially when you talk about the Los Angeles Rams, and I know that the Falcons and Rams they have a good relationship. I mean, Les Snead is the GM out there. That's an Auburn grad. That's a guy who was under the ownership here when I was playing. So Les Snead very familiar with this. That was who they made the trade for to get up and get James Pierce. So there's a lot of interesting storylines in terms of the LA Rams, and obviously the Saints at home, Week 18. I mean, what more can you ask for in terms of that matchup? So I think there's a lot of intriguing storylines, but the two home games to end the year, you hope it's not too little too late. You're like, thank you for that we get to end a couple of times, when we get to the end of December and obviously early January, but hopefully not too little too late when you look at the schedule. One
of the biggest reasons why that will be a Monday Night Football game for sure, I would imagine, is the ties. You mentioned Sean McVay, a Marist grad, of course, but Raheem Morris having spent time in Los Angeles, and that's probably a lot of the reason why the deal went through the way that it did with James Pierce Jr. Let's look at these primetime games. That's what I was quickly writing down, because again, this schedule's coming out in live time just like you guys are watching it. We want to react the same time as you, and I don't have it memorized, so I got to write it down. So we have 5 primetime games. By the way, Mike, this is the most primetime games that they've had to start a year since 2017, the year after the Super Bowl. And that was, by the way, the last time that the Falcons went to the playoffs. They had 5 total last year, but as we had mentioned, I think earlier, probably half an hour ago, flexed into the Commanders game at the end of last year. 5 primetime games. You got Week 2 Sunday Night Football, the Vikings, which you're looking at right now. Week 6, Buffalo Bills. Week 7, Sunday Night Football and the 49ers. Week 15, Thursday Night Football, the Bucks. Week 17, Rams, Monday Night Football. What is your overarching opinion about these primetime games? These are really tough games. Is it weird that I'm letting the NFL talk me into the fact that the Falcons are going to be good? I love this. Hey, give me a little snippet that's like, hey, we think the Falcons are going to be very good, and this is one of those. And I think you felt this way last year, coming off 2 years ago, like you said. No primetime games 2 years ago. You wondered what that would look like last year, and you get the 4, obviously, with the flex. You feel good. You're like, oh man, they really expect there to be at least some storylines, right? And I think that's what the NFL and the TV networks are most focused on. Well, and then remember last year when they had the Eagles, and we were like, there's no chance. And then Kirk goes in there, and it's just like, wait a second, they just took down the Eagles in Philadelphia. Especially once the Atlanta Falcons opened with Pittsburgh and were anemic offensively, you were like, this is not going to be good. And they were able to turn that around very, very quickly, obviously, and do a lot of good things. And Kirk Cousins did, do some good things throughout that schedule. So, yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at primetime games, obviously you look for storylines, and all of these primetime games, for the most part, are loaded with them. We didn't even get a chance to talk about the matchup between Kyle Shanahan. I know a lot of Atlanta Falcons fans have opinions about him. That will be talked about, I'm sure, ad nauseum in Week 7 as the Falcons travel for Sunday Night Football. It's just one of those things where that eyes and focus will be on the Atlanta Falcons, and we already know that. Like I said, no favors being done, but you're going to have the Penix storyline. You're going to have the Bijan storyline. You're going to have, hopefully, a team that is pointing towards the playoffs. And I think that bodes very, very well when you look at it from an outside national perspective on what the Atlanta Falcons are expected to be. Let's go in on this 49ers matchup for a second. You mentioned Kyle Shanahan. That will be the storyline that we are all discussing for probably 2 weeks straight leading into this game. And then you got Mykal Williams, who the 49ers picked him up. That is a local tie for us, of course. And the 49ers are just a very good football team, and they have been for years. Kyle Shanahan, there's a lot of mixed emotions about him here in this city. What do you think? What do you think the reaction's going to be to this one? Well, I think first and foremost, a lot of the focus will be on Brock Purdy, who's waiting on a new contract. Christian McCaffrey, obviously. Bijan Robinson has said multiple times that he kind of models himself after what Christian McCaffrey is able to do. That is a team that I don't want to say they're in flux right now. They still have George Kittle. They still have a number of different pieces in place, but Deebo Samuel's moved on. You really, really wonder what the future is in that offensive line. So they've got a few things to prove themselves. It's not like you just expect San Francisco to come in here and run over the Atlanta Falcons out there in San Francisco, but I think that the talking point to your point is going to be Kyle Shanahan. It's going to be the matchup, and it's going to be what everybody's talking about leading into that one because of the Super Bowl, because of the comeback, because of the fact that the Falcons haven't been to the playoffs in 8 years now. So yeah, unfortunately, Falcons fans will have to endure those talking points throughout that part of the schedule. But it is what it is, and I'm sure that we'll look forward to that matchup when it gets here. Falcons fans have to endure a lot of that and all of those memories every single year. It comes up for sure. And also Leonard Floyd, who's a new addition to the Falcons. He played for the 49ers last year, so that will also be a very big talking point. Any of those other primetime matchups besides, we went over the Bills. The Vikings are a little bit intriguing, not as intriguing as if Kirk was your starting quarterback, of course, but then, of course, the Bucks being Thursday Night Football. Where do you feel like they could get a couple of wins in this stretch?
Well, I was going to say the fan and just the simple X's and O's guys. I mean, I look at that Bills game, and I know Falcons fans are going to circle that Bills game. Like, this is so exciting. Monday Night Football. You know, Bills Mafia is going to be in the house down at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, breaking tables in the Home Depot backyard. You know, whatever else is going on. So the football fan in me is excited. The X's and O's part of me looks at it and is like, dude, this is not a good matchup. You know, when you look at the Falcons' inability to really stop the run consistently throughout the middle of the defensive line, and they didn't really address that. Eddie Goldman's not here anymore. Grady Jarrett obviously has moved on to Chicago. You wonder what that'll look like, and obviously Josh Allen has shown the ability to run it down your throat when need be. So they're just every single one of these. I think the overarching theme with these primetime games, they're all different kind of flavors, right? Kyle Shanahan does things different offensively than Josh Allen will do, than Tampa Bay Buccaneers will do on Thursday Night Football, than the Minnesota Vikings will do. They're all different, and I think that the matchups that Raheem Morris will bring to the table defensively will be the one thing I'll be focused on when you get to all these primetime games.
And we talk about how this is a pretty tough schedule. There's no easy schedule in the NFL. I don't believe that. But this is a tough primetime schedule. However, if you remember last year, Falcons showed up pretty good on primetime.
They really, really did. And like I said, we were talking earlier about Pittsburgh, and you led off with them in week 1, and everybody was talking about the Justin Fields matchup, and it ended up being the TJ Watt show. And really, my question coming off that game, as were a lot of Falcons fans, is what is Zach Robinson doing? You know, I was like, you had all offseason to prepare for week 1, and that's the game plan you came out with. Answered the bell there in week 2, obviously. And look, let's talk a little bit about the Kansas City Chiefs that you had in primetime.
You're right.
Should have won the football game, right? You had every opportunity. Pass interference call right at the end of the game could have gone your way, and you could have won that primetime game as well. So I think that they're obviously, when the lights are brightest, that's when you step up to the stage, and as a football player, that's when you hope you can play your best. I expect the Falcons to do that once again. Michael Penix, while he is very, very young in the NFL, he's no stranger to the spotlight, right? He's played in national title games and played in a lot of big games along the way. So I think he'll step right into that role, and we'll know sooner than later what he's made of. There's no doubt.
Yeah, and he's very seasoned at this point, not in the NFL, but he is a little bit older than some of these guys that are rookies going into the NFL. So he's played a ton of football. And everybody that you talk to, you've had so many conversations with coaches and players, they sing his praises like you would not believe. It's this guy is the real deal. And I don't really think a lot of people are going out on the edge for a guy like that if they really don't believe it, when we've only seen 3 games from him. Not to give him all the praise, he's still got to prove some stuff, but this is a very good testing measurement for Mike, and I think he could rise to the occasion.
Well, and I think it goes back to draft night when we were all shocked a couple of years ago, right? And Raheem Morris has said time and time again, as has Terry Fontenot, when you have conviction about a quarterback prospect, you go out on a limb for that guy, and that's exactly what the Falcons did. Now, we all still scratch our head about the Kirk Cousins signing and everything else that went into that. The Falcons went about it a different way than anybody ever, probably in the history the NFL has ever done. But again, there was conviction about not only the player he is, but the person he is. And I think that you've seen that throughout the draft processes with Terry Fontenot. They've done a good job. We've heard already a number of times in the last couple of weeks about the meetings with James Pierce and his family and how all those things went. So, yeah, I think that inside of that building, they are very comfortable with who Michael Penix is. You saw the interview a couple of weeks ago with Bryant McFadden, where they're eating at Waffle House, and Michael Penix is just very ho-hum. It's like, hey, you know, I don't know how I feel about that. It is what it is. I just want to play football. And honestly, in the end, that's what you want out of your quarterback in terms of a locker room guy and a foundational piece for a franchise.
Yeah, he's like just chilling. He doesn't care about much. The do-rag thing is a whole bit now, thanks to his teammate.
I loved it.
Bijan Robinson went out on a limb on a podcast and said he's never seen him with it off. He showers with it on, and so Mike actually is like, yeah, now I'm never going to take it off. So he's showing his personality a little bit. That's great. He's going to show it big time on prime time. Hate to put you on the spot, Mike. Give me a record.
Oh man. You know, going into this, I would have said 10 wins is the floor. You know what I mean? Okay. This is a tough schedule, right? And I think I'm still kind of catching my breath, to be quite honest with you.
You were into the Week 5 bye.
The Week 5 bye is backed up with the Berlin, Germany game, and then knowing what's coming before and after the Berlin game. That's a tough draw, right? And so I still think that you've got to look at a football team that has to get over the hump, that has to be above 500, that has to make a playoff push in order for things to kind of stay status quo in Flowery Branch. I'm going to stick with 10-7, and I'm going to sit here with my fingers and toes crossed at the desk with you, and hopefully that's the case. But as you draw it up and you look at the sequence of events on the schedule, you have to use the highlighter to try to pick those 10 out because they got some tough draws.
So you think this is a playoff team?
I think it should be, and that's if everybody continues to take a step forward, and if Raheem Morris takes a step forward, and Zach Robinson takes a step forward. That's not even to mention Michael Penix and being able to create explosives in the passing game and in the run game. So we'll see. But I think with the talent you have, you're talking about 3 first-round offensive linemen, Drake London step into the power slot role. You really got a lot out of Darnell Mooney. I think it's fair to say that you should be able to find 10 wins on this schedule and hopefully win the division this year.
It's a sophomore season for a lot of people. You're talking about a head coach, an offensive coordinator, and a quarterback. However, his freshman season was not really a full freshman season. All right, guys, thanks for joining us. This has been just such a joy to have you on, Mike Johnson. We're going to have you back because you give us all the knowledge and all of the reason why we should hate the Week 5 bye. We think this is a playoff team. I hope you guys do too. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your night.